We're going to talk about integrated pest management, and I really appreciate Lisa's introduction and her enthusiasm for integrated pest management, and I agree with her entirely. First of all, before I start this whole thing on integrated pest management, I first of all want to thank you all for becoming master gardeners. You are so important to me and to the University of California that you don't even know. And I know it takes a lot of work to become a master gardener. You've got to go to all these classes, you've got to do all these projects, you've got to do all this volunteering. It's a lot of work, but it's all really worth it. You are becoming part of the University of California. The University of California is a land grant university, and so that makes us different from San Diego State or Stanford, because we have a responsibility not only to teach students, but to teach the public, farmers, professionals, but also the general public. And there's over 38 million Californians, and every single one of them has a pest problem. And you can see how many people you have in the San Diego County office who are paid to answer pest questions from the general public, probably maybe 2.5, if that. And they can't, and it's the same way across the state. So in order to fulfill our obligation of getting this science-based information out to the public, we need you. We really need you, and it's a really important thing that you do. And then, of course, when you are wearing your University of California Master Gardener badge, you are representing the University of California. You're not representing Scott's Chemicals, and you're not representing Organic Gardening Magazine. You're representing the University of California. And so we do want you to be delivering information from the University of California. And it's information that you can be proud to deliver, because it's science-based, we've got it peer-reviewed, try to keep it up to date, but that's very important. And that's one reason why I've spent my career, a large part of my career, trying to develop tools or information sources, books, webpage, information for you to be able to deliver to people, and so they can access it on our website easily, because it's not easy. When if you're just dealing with citrus growers or tomato growers, there's only a dozen or 15 pests that commonly occur on that crop. So you can become an expert pretty fast. But you guys are master gardeners. You're dealing with problems in people's gardens on hundreds of different plants. And you can't possibly know all the pest problems that you're going to encounter, even after many years as a master gardener. And so it's complex and it's hard, and you need to use your resources, and you want to make sure you don't answer, right away. You want to make sure you know what you're talking about. I've been with the university for 30 years. I always look everything up because I can't keep it in my mind. So what I am doing today, I only have a short time, is that you're not going to come out of these set of lectures being an expert on pest management. And I know you also have other classes on entomology, weed science, and plant pathology, but even after that, you're not going to be an expert. So forget about it, if that's what you thought you were going to be after the end of this master gardener training. What I hope you are is you'll know enough to know you don't know everything. But the most important thing I want you to get out of today is where to look to get the information you need. Because that's when you really learn. When somebody asks you a question and you have to answer it, then that's when you are really going to learn the information. And so today I'm going to give you a general sense of the philosophy of integrated pest management and maybe how we put things together. And then the other biggest part of it is where to go for information when you need it. And how to sense whether the information you've got is the right answer. And so that's what you should get out of today, I hope. So, first of all, what is integrated pest management? I'll stand over here so I can see my slides. So, integrated pest management, first of all, it's based on the ecosystem. And that's what makes integrated pest management so fascinating, is that you aren't just managing bugs, and you're not just managing weeds. You're really managing a whole ecosystem in your backyard or in your garden or on your farm. And so an ecosystem has got a lot of interacting factors, and you can change pieces of your ecosystem so you won't have as many pest problems, and that's what we try to do in integrated pest management. And we're focusing on prevention. In integrated pest management, we're trying to make that ecosystem so you don't get the pests in the first place. That's the best way to maintain the environment. It's the best way for long-term pest control, and usually it's the least expensive way to do it. So we're going to try to prevent the problems so we don't have to go and suppress them or control them. And in order to do this, in order to work with the ecosystem, in order to know when to do preventive things, you need to be out there looking. You need to be monitoring, what we call monitoring out there, and looking for signs of pests, looking for signs of maybe deteriorating plant health, maybe looking out there for beneficial insects that might help you in your management. So you're out there monitoring. You're monitoring for signs in the environment. The integrating part of integrated pest management is we're using a combination of complementary techniques. So you may use prevention, like a resistant variety, or a different irrigation method, or you may use biological control, or you may use traps, or you may use pesticides in some cases. But you're integrating them together so they work together in an ecosystem. That's the integrating part of integrated pest management. So let's look at the landscape ecosystem. Here's a nice little ecosystem with a house and a sidewalk and lots of different plants in there. And so what is in this ecosystem? First of all, there's the physical environment. We've got soil, we've got water, either put on through rain occasionally or put on through irrigation more often. And there's shade in there, there's sun in there. And so this physical environment, there's soil type, this puts limits on what you can grow in that ecosystem. And so it's sort of the bottom line of what you can grow. You can't grow certain plants in certain areas because either the soil type doesn't work, or it's too shady, or it's too wet, or it's too hot. And so that physical environment puts limits on what you can grow. It also puts limits on what pests are going to be successful. So we know some fungus diseases, they're not going to become a problem if it's dry all the time. But if it's rainy all the time, then they're going to become more of a problem. So the physical environment, it puts really limits on what can grow there, good and bad. And some of these physical environment things you can control through irrigation, maybe soil supplements, but other things like the weather, you can't. Plant variety, and so as I mentioned before, the wonderful thing about your landscape is the plant variety you have there. You have, well, how many different species of plants do you have in your gardens? One of everything. 50, 100. And then what about if you count the weeds? Add another 2. So you have a great diversity of plants. And it's much more interesting than a field of tomatoes, particularly where the tomato grower is keeping the weeds out there too. So it's kind of a boring ecosystem, but this is a diverse ecosystem, and each of those plant species has probably got 10 or so different pest species that could occur from time to time on it. Most of those pest species, not all, but most of them are pretty host specific. So for instance, when you look at aphids, they may look all alike to you, but in fact, especially for the woody ornamentals, most of the aphids on woody ornamentals are very fussy. They only feed on one species of plant or plants in the same genus or closely related plants. And so the aphids on your rose bush are not going to feed on your crepe myrtle, and they're not going to feed on your elm tree. So they're all different species of aphids out there. So the plant variety determines the variety of pests, and plant pathogens are often even more specific. So we have the herbivores feeding on our plants, and except when they're feeding on weeds, they're usually considered pests. So that includes insects, it includes bunny rabbits, and it includes birds, and we can all kinds of invertebrates, and we can just throw the plant pathogens in there, although they're not usually called herbivores. So there's a diversity, great diversity there. And then feeding on our herbivores, we have carnivores. And so the carnivores, most of the time, if they're feeding on the herbivores that we don't like, whether they're aphids or caterpillars, then we're calling these carnivores beneficial insects. So you've got a food chain there. You've got a food web in your ecosystem. Food webs make up ecosystems, or the biotic components of ecosystems. And this is what you're working with as you're working in your garden. Of course, there are also predators and parasitoids that feed on our beneficial insects a little farther up in the food chain, so not all carnivores are necessarily beneficial. And then there's you. There's you. And the things that you do in your garden have a tremendous impact on that ecosystem. So, you know, if you are over-watering your ecosystem, or putting a little bit too much nitrogen on the ecosystem, or accidentally spilling some glyphosate or Roundup on there, that's going to have an impact. You choose what is planted there. And then there's your dog. And your dog is urinating, causing all kinds of problems, or digging things up. Or so this is the ecosystem does include you. So put yourself there in the picture and see how you're impacting that ecosystem. And so when we do integrated pest management, we are looking at our wonderful ecosystem, and we're just looking at everything that's going on there and how it might impact pests. So it's a wonderful mind thing to do with your mind. So what is a pest? So pests are organisms that are annoying us. They might be damaging our plants. They might be eating our buildings. I mean, they're definitely causing nasty things out there, but they're defined by us. And when we finally wipe ourselves off the face of the earth, wipe off the human species off the face of the earth, there will be no pests. There'll just be organisms out there living their lives, eating each other, out-competing each other, and the ecosystem will go on, but nobody will be called a pest. So it's very personal, because some people in this room will think some things are a pest, and other people will think that they're not a pest, or maybe that they're even beneficial or desirable in the environment. And you, as a master gardener, are going to be dealing with all of these different people with different ideas and different opinions. And you have to accept the fact that your position is not always right. Maybe sometimes it is, but not always. Or you have to be able to be tactful with people who think differently. So let's just take a look. This cute little tree squirrel. How many think a tree squirrel is a pest? So about a quarter of the people in here who think it's a pest. It certainly is a pest. You're growing apricots or other soft fruits out there. They're harvesting that fruit before you have an opportunity to. So it's a really problem. But if you just have maybe oak trees and turfs and native plants, and they're not really causing any damage in your ecosystem, you think they're cute. My goodness, how many people are out there in the park feeding the squirrels peanuts? Lots of them. And so it's a matter of personal opinion. Scotch broom, you familiar with Scotch broom down here? Is it a pest? Beautiful yellow plant, and sold in nurseries. Well, it's an invasive plant. It's not native to California, and at least in Northern California, it is every year. It's just growing more and more up the highways and the wild areas, displacing the native plants. And so it is one of those exotic, invasive plants that we're trying to keep out so that we can retain our native species. However, it's still sold in retail nurseries around the state. People are paying good money to buy these plants. So obviously, they don't think they're pests. And that's an educational thing. Many of the Master Gardener programs are working with their local retail nurseries to try to identify some of these invasive plants and to encourage them to sell other plants that look similar but aren't invasive. Just because it's exotic and comes from another continent or country, just because it's exotic doesn't mean it's invasive, and it doesn't mean it's bad. It's just the exotic plants that have an ability to really self-establish themselves in wild areas that are problems. Not all exotics are bad. I know, I remember somebody was talking about how they were actually talking to a class of children, or somebody was, and talking about how these exotic alien plants were bad. And, some little kid, said, well, I'm from Mexico, my bad. It was they didn't like the, just because you're exotic, you could actually be much better, but we just don't want to, we don't like those exotic plants that are off spreading on their own. What about eucalyptus? Is that a pest? Yes. Yeah, lots of people think that is. And it's an exotic, but and in Northern California, up in Oakland and Berkeley, a decade or more back, when there was a big freeze, the eucalyptus all died, and then there was a big fire, and many houses burned down because of that, and that was one example of how eucalyptus can be a problem. On the other hand, we've had these eucalyptus that were brought in more than 100 years ago, and they can be truly beautiful trees. And what we've found, what we find is, for the first, they brought in eucalyptus in the 1880s, and they brought them in thinking that they would be a good source for lumber. Well, that didn't work. But they were here, and some people use them as windbreaks, and they've established, and they have actually almost become part of our ecosystem. But for the first 100 years, what's interesting about eucalyptus is they came in, but they didn't have any pests. And in about the 1990s, we started getting pest insects coming in, because eucalyptus are native of Australia. And we got the eucalyptus lurk psyllid, and we got the eucalyptus borer, longhorn borer, and we got the eucalyptus tortoise beetle. And so people started finding all these pests on their eucalyptus trees, and they were calling the master gardeners and the cooperative extension offices, what do we do to protect our eucalyptus from these pests? So obviously, once you're trying to protect your pests from other pests, maybe they're not pests anymore. So it's a matter of opinion. Certainly, you want to be careful if you're considering planting eucalyptus to choose the right varieties. What about spiders? Are spiders pests?
No.
Oh, you've all been trained pretty good as master gardeners. You've already been told that spiders are good guys in our gardens because they feed on other insects and also even in our houses. But there are certainly a lot of people out there that you're going to be working with and communicating with who really don't like spiders. And of course they are really scared of being bitten and killed by spiders. But the fact is that the good news in California is we don't have the really dangerous spiders that are in other parts of the world. We do have the black widow spider, And the black widow spider is the primary spider of concern in California. It doesn't kill people, but it injures people, and you need to go to a doctor and get it treated. Often infections occur with it. But so the black widow spider is very distinctive, and it's only the adult female that can bite you and put the toxin in you. And the female is big and shiny black with that red hourglass on the underneath. And the black widow is not out there feeding on your on the tops of your flowers, or it's usually in the wood pile or out in the garage in a hidden kind of area with lots of cobwebs, and so you can usually identify it, and you may want to remove that habitat that encourages it. There's the brown widow now here in Southern California, but it really hasn't been shown to bite people with much impact. There is the brown recluse spider that you hear a lot about, but in fact it's not established in California, not even in Southern California, although it has been collected here, and another recluse spider has been collected, but they're very, very rare. And so there is this, and then there's the hobo spider. The hobo spider does not occur in California. And so the spiders are somewhat confusing, and people feel very passionate about them, and they may be coming to you for information about them. And this is the wonderful thing about being a master gardener, is that you don't have to be an expert on spiders. What you are is you are the person who transmits information from an expert on spiders to the public. And one of the handouts you have is the list of pest notes. I think and you can print this off, but the pest notes, and some of you, have you heard about pest notes in your master garden training? Okay, so they're not these are peer-reviewed publications written by academics within the University of California, and this is the information source. So when people start asking you spider questions and you're getting uncomfortable and you want to tell them the hobo spider doesn't occur here, we have if you look under the insects and mites, and this is all on the web, maybe easier there, but you can see that under the insects, mites, it doesn't say spiders there, it should, but we have a pest note on the hobo spider. We have a pest note on black widow and other widow spiders. You can send people, these have been written by Rick Vetter, who is an arachnologist at UC Riverside, a real national expert on spiders. And if you think you've found a brown recluse spider, preserve it in alcohol and send it to Rick, because he's really interested, if there is one. Usually they'll discover that, or show it to your ag commissioners or someone in your cooperative extension office to get it properly identified. In most cases, it's not going to be. I mean, it isn't probably going to be. But you use your resources. You have pest notes on over 160 pests. And so this is where you go for information. Because if you go on the web, you're going to get all kinds of information about spiders that don't even occur in California. And they're going to scare you. These spiders do occur in Idaho, but they don't occur here. So use these resources. Earwigs, are they pests? People are ambivalent. Do you not have earwigs in San Diego? Right. Okay, well, but the ambivalence is really well justified, because earwigs are omnivores. So yes, they love to eat those little vegetable seedlings that you have, or those strawberries that are ripening there in your garden, or your peach or apricot, just as it's just nice and ripening, juicy, soft on the tree. And they'll eat those. They'll eat your corn silks. They'll go eat the petals off some of your flowers. And so if you're growing those things, then yeah, they're a pest. But keep in mind that earwigs love to eat aphids, and they love to eat eggs of various kinds of insects. And so if you have a garden that's more native plants, maybe some oak trees, maybe some cactus, maybe some just grasses or even a little turf, earwigs aren't going to be a problem. If you have an apple tree, they don't eat apples because apples are hard fruit, but apples do have aphid problems, and so they can actually be beneficial on an apple tree. So think about what your ecosystem is before you get nuts about it, because they may be doing more good than bad. Now, I'm not suggesting that you encourage earwigs in your garden, although some organic apple growers actually have put little nesting boxes for earwigs in their orchards to increase the earwig population, because that's what earwigs need to survive. Is they need hiding places where they can hide out of the sun with a little moisture so they can come out at night and eat your strawberries. But if you remove those hiding places, and that's part of this prevention, think like an earwig. Think about what is the environment that favors you, and you can often reduce that habitat that increases earwigs. So the earwigs are one of those pests, if you do need to manage them, there's not pesticides that are really effective against earwigs. You really have to remove the habitat that allows them to grow up to really high populations. So the other thing about pests is even those species that can become problems are usually not problems if there's only a few of them. And there's a few exceptions to that, things like bed bugs. But in our plant pests, usually you can tolerate a few aphids, you can tolerate a few scale, and actually having a few is good because the beneficial insects can survive on them. But there usually is some high level, some high density of that pest when they start becoming a problem. And we call that, if you're a farmer and you're trying to sell your crop, sometimes that's called an economic threshold. When it's makes economic sense to spend money controlling it so that you can make money at the market to pay off the expense you made for controlling it. Backyard gardeners don't really have that economics because they're so passionate and they can do a lot of things for free by hand. But there is an aesthetic threshold, and so there's some amount of that pest that you can't stand, and or that is going to be a problem for you. But so there's that population level, and it'll vary among people. Okay, so we've been talking about pests, but not all the damage in your garden or landscape is due to pests. Pests are living organisms, but there's a lot of plant damage in your gardens that's caused by non-living factors, or what we call abiotic factors. And so we see more damage to plants and gardens from these non-living factors than we do from the pests or the living pests. But the pests usually get blamed for it. People like blaming living things, not other things, especially since a lot of the abiotic factors are due to bad decisions on the part of the person managing the garden. Over and under watering, probably the #1 cause of plant damage in California. Nutrient deficiencies, so some plants are going to show nutrient deficiencies or mineral toxicities. But also we see a lot of fertilizer damage. People put on too much fertilizer, and that can damage the plant too. You see herbicide damage from other kinds of pesticides. These are all abiotic types of damage. And mechanical injury. So when you drive your truck into the tree, or you're building something and you're digging around the roots, there's all kinds of mechanical injury sources. But the living pests can be insects, rodents, various kinds of disease-causing microbes or plant pathogens, nematodes, snails and slugs. And often the damage can look very similar. So you're seeing similar symptoms from herbicide damage as you might be from curling aphids. So here we've got curled leaves due to aphids, curled leaves due to 2,4-D. And so how are you going to tell them apart? What would be one way? Look for the aphids. Right. You got curled leaves, and you don't see any bugs or any sign of a fungus or something like that. hey, could be an abiotic cause. And sometimes even if you do see a few aphids, it still might not be due to the aphids. So the diagnostic is you got to be careful. And here are some brown spots in lawns, caused by all different kinds of things. Lawns have brown spots in them quite frequently, and there are many contributing factors to these, the least of which usually is pests. But if you go to many of our garden centers and you say, I have brown spots in my lawn, what are they going to tell you to do?
Fertilize.
They could tell you to fertilize.
They'll give you a fungicide.
They could tell you to apply fungicide, or they can tell you to apply an insecticide. But you shouldn't do any of those things until you diagnose what the cause is, because in most cases in California, it isn't due to an insect, and it isn't due to a fungus. Because it's amazing compared to now, back east, especially in the southeast, they have a lot of problems with pathogens on lawns. But because we have our dry summers, we really don't have problems with diseases on lawns. On the very highly managed golf courses, which are mowed very closely and they're using very sensitive turf species, they have pathogen problems. But the kinds of turf you should be growing in your lawn, if you are growing a lawn, shouldn't really have, the pathogens are pretty rare. And the same for insects. Lawn grubs do occur, but they're actually very, very sporadic. So they certainly don't justify annual application of imidacloprid every year to your lawn, which some people will tell you to do. So here we have some brown spots, fertilizer bird. One of the very common reasons next to bad sprinkler systems. Bad sprinkler systems is the #1 cause of brown spot. Fertilizer burn, people, fertilizer, you put too much on it, it'll kill the grass or burn it back. And so that's why you want to measure it properly and spread it evenly. This one is glyphosate damage, so oops, somebody spelled the Roundup. But there's some fungal pathogens. So sometimes you do have fungus or insects. You just have to. So if you think that's what it is, confirm by finding evidence of the disease or the insect. And you will find insects in your lawns. Like you'll find lawn moths in your lawns, but they're usually not at a level that requires management. And if you look at the lawn pest note or lawn quick tip, you'll find some thresholds.